Hi everybody, and welcome to another asset creation video. My name is Sparklehausen, and today we're going to be taking a look at more of a sort of texturing thing, and more of like texturing theory, or at least how I kind of create these assets. So, as most of you guys probably know by now, I don't make real-life brands, real-life vehicles, railroads, airlines, whatever. I've become less creative lately, but it's supposed to at least be kind of versions that are a little bit unique, a little different, and kind of in-universe takes, I guess. So obviously here, Gramercy Southern is Norfolk Southern, and it's a railroad in the east coast of the U.S., and I figure, you know what, Gramercy's in the east coast of the U.S., so it's a good match. In any case here, so the train I'm creating right now is an excursion train. So it's like a vintage steam locomotive that's been restored in operating service, and is going and hauling a whole bunch of privately owned vintage railcars, and a couple ones owned by CityLink, like public cars. And it just takes it on this nice little excursion route where they go see some pretty scenery and whatever, and then come back. So it's not like a real train, so every car needed its own sort of livery, which I thought was a lot of fun. So this is actually just one of two excursion trains I'm going to be making soon. This one should hopefully be up on the workshop by the time you see it. But it's kind of the reason why I want to talk about this is because I'm really happy with how this turned out in terms of what railroads I picked to represent. So this one being on the East Coast, being based out of, we'll assume, Gramercy, which is like New York City, I wanted to focus on kind of East Coast railroads. Like, I know it's still common for a privately owned train car to go all the way across the country, but I thought it'd be unique if the one pulled by, I've got two steam locomotives right now. I've got the Daylight, which is West Coast, and this Dreyfuss 20th Century Limited Hudson, which is East Coast. So I figured I could fill this thing with all sorts of very good East Coast trains. East Coast train cars. So it was a lot of fun, actually. I spent a lot of time researching and looking up different rail cars. I wanted ones that were still, maybe additionally, like still restored, so that you'd be able to find them here. So like in real life, there are actually real life equivalents to a lot of these cars, which I think is a lot of fun. So right now I'm going through and making a matching sort of 20th Century Limited car, because I figured that would be a really good choice to match. I'm checking, making sure the stripes line up. But in any case, I wanted to talk about kind of how I develop these cars and how I think of my own brands and things. So the first thing I do is I find real life reference. I look up and I say, okay, a big famous railroad from that time is the New York Central. And then my first kind of check is, has anybody done a New York style city? I have. It's Gramercy. So Gramercy is a very easy one. Anything that would be New York in the real world is pretty much replaced one-to-one with Gramercy. Then beyond that, I kind of go a little regional. So before, you saw me making the Minuteman, which is a Boston and Maine sort of thing. I thought, like, Boston, nobody's really made like a really northeasternly city. So started trying to kind of think of like what Bostonian sorts of things could I do, and the Minuteman was just really easy. It even feels like a streamlined train. Like, this is the Minuteman. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a real one. I do a little bit of research on making sure I'm not actually using real stuff when I don't want to be, but oftentimes not as much as I'd hope maybe. So moving along from that, I'm continuing with this Gramercy Central car, and really a lot of them, so I really like incorporating other people's cities, and you'll see this with the freight train pack that's coming out eventually, where I have a lot of different cities and a lot of different things that people actually have made. So obviously, like the Cedar Valley, Northern, the Arrowhead, and Western are all kind of just like, yeah, I'm a fan of these series, I'm a fan of these other cities, and I feel like it's really cool and people want to see, and I mean, I want to see, like Arrowhead and Western train. I'm like, oh, I've seen that series. Like, I think it's a neat sort of like reference stuff, which I'm usually not a huge fan of, but since it's original, I'm really happy about it. So in my other monitor, I have all sorts of reference images for each of these cars. I picked the railroads pretty much first, and then went along and tried to find matching images, or like matching cars for them. So I just searched like Pennsylvania Railroad coach, that became the Keystone. This dome car is based off of one that Amtrak actually still runs. So That was a very easy choice. It's a CityLink. It's decorated in like a vintage livery. This one I'm not like super thrilled with, but that Amtrak livery is so basic. I really could not possibly think of a way to make it different. So it's literally just the Amtrak livery, but with the word Amtrak replaced by CityLink. Not amazing, but whatever. We'll see if I end up doing anything different. I doubt it. We'll see though. But it's kind of cool because getting to make my own companies, I really do that a lot. A lot of people assume it's for copyright reasons, which actually isn't quite true. I really do it and really love doing it because it lets me have a little bit of creative freedom. So if I were doing real ones, it turns out a lot of railroads on the East Coast just use maroons and reds. So in that, the Boston and Maine had their stainless streamliners with like a maroon color. And of course, that would look exactly like my Pennsylvania Railroad car and my Norfolk Southern car. So I figured maybe we'll go a little different, and being able to be different and saying this is not a recreation of an existing train car, it's an original sort of one, just heavily inspired. Let me do some interesting stuff, and in this case, that was have a green stripe on a train car, which I really liked. So it ended up really working out for me, I guess, in that I could really shuffle stuff around. I could make it more interesting looking, I think, and really make things more unique. I'm very excited to do the West Coast train now after doing this, just because it was a lot of fun to sit through and make all these unique cars. Actually, some of them will be in both. So this CityLink Sky Lounge dome car is going to be in both, but it's interesting. So I really wanted to pull from real life cars on each railroad and pull from real life inspiration. Like, what cars would probably have been bought from an East Coast railroad in the 60s, and then restored and probably kept on the East Coast, and rather than transported all the way across the country. So I don't just kind of continuing on trying to figure out what else I can add, because I had a whole bunch of ideas to talk about now. Ends up that I think I've burned through them all. But anyway, so yeah, it also lets me, this kind of practice of doing my own vehicles, lets me take a loose sort of inspiration from a lot of these. So this is a Baltimore and Ohio car, and they never ran any of these at all. They didn't really have these types of dome cars, and they didn't look like this, but I really wanted kind of a dark blue, like, painted car, so I just got to do it. And it always feels a little weird. I definitely, as weird as it sounds, I open myself up when I do this to a lot of people who I never would have expected this, but they go on the Steam Workshop and they're like, well, actually, Baltimore, I didn't run this. Or I get that with airplanes a lot. Like, I've got people who are just like, oh, you have the wrong number of exit door windows on this specific model of plane. I'm like, oh, geez. But I really kind of don't care about that too much. Like, as long as I can get the feeling, as long as I can get this looking like a train with a lot of interesting variety, and with kind of that East Coast sort of slant. So, less like big domes for seeing grand scenery. The only ones are like a very modern sort of Amtrak / CityLink sort of thing. And then one much more reserved dome towards the back. So, here you're seeing me do the final car, the tail car on the train, which is this beautiful rounded observation car. And I just throw in a little reference to Strictos' old Cedar Valley series, because that's just what came to my mind real quick. And that one, I find myself falling back on Cedar Valley quite a lot, because it's kind of geographically nebulous, unlike Gramercy, which is definitely East Coast, or like San Bernardino or Aramore, which are Pacific Northwest, or something like that. Cedar Valley is very kind of geographically could be anywhere, so I kind of always imagine it maybe like accessible by train by everywhere. So it's like maybe a Chicago or somewhere like that. I don't really know, but going through, and I decide, you know what, since this is a modern train, we'll probably just do like the CityLink Cedar Valley special. Like, it's some special thing they're putting on just for the hell of it. So it's a lot of fun just going through here and trying to calculate like how to get the slope working for these cars. For the paint scheme on here, because this is definitely straight from the New York Central's later designs. But I end up really happy with the way this all turns out. And as you can see here, as the music like smashes in, it's got a beautiful amount of variety, a nice amount of like shapes and things. And you can download it now in the Steam Workshop. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.